So we're going, reaching towards the end of the webinar. We will be discussing a couple of potential issues when dealing with MySQL replication. First of them is lag, which we mentioned a couple of times during this webinar. So it's inevitable part of MySQL replication, whether it's asynchronous or semi-synchronous. As I said at the beginning, semi-synchronous replication, it just means that relay logs were stored on disk. That's it. So node can be lagging for can be 3 days behind, but as long as it's flashing its relay logs, it can act as as a slave, semi-synchronous slave. In general, lag can be caused by a large number of writes and can be caused by DDLs. With DDLs, there is the best way to avoid lag is using PT-online schema change, which has this lag, the throttle ability, and it can monitor the replication lag. For large number of writes, on the other hand, multi-threaded slave with GTID is a way to go to minimize the impact of the lag. And this is actually important to say that those things comes together. So you can run GTID on single thread, that's just fine. But if you're running multi-threaded slave, you want to use GTID also. This is basically the problem that, theoretically speaking, you could run, you can run multi-threaded slave without GTID, but it's like if you were asking for trouble, because eventually it will break, and that's definitely not a good idea. So multi-threaded slave only with GTID. And of course, hardware has to follow. So the multi-threading helps for the CPU. It won't help you if your bottleneck is the storage, the performance of your I/O subsystem. So you have to make sure that your storage is quick, your storage is fast enough. So we are talking about SSDs or even better PCI flash cards, PCI Express flash disks. So that's the way of handling the lag, basically. Quick storage and multi-threading for you to be able to use more of the CPU. Data drift, another problem which may happen even if you take all necessary precautions. Basically, this is because the bugs can happen. Bugs exist. Bugs can also impact your data consistency. Of course, to minimize the chance that something goes wrong, you want to use raw binary log format. Although, as I said earlier, this also introduces it's the most strict in terms of the schema incompatibilities, right? So you have to be aware and make sure that changes that you're implementing using the rolling schema upgrade, that they are compatible and will work with row-based replication. Of course, you can use read-only and super read-only on slaves to minimize the possibility of errant writes. Super read-only has been added in 5.7. It also is available in Percona Server 5.6. I don't remember exactly which version, but I believe it was at least 1 year. It's here for at least 1 year, I think. So you can use those options to minimize the chance that something will be writing to your slaves. Of course, PT table checks and PT table sync to keep an eye on the data consistency and, if needed, to fix it. And of course, when in doubt, you can rebuild a slave from the source of truth, from the master, either manually or as we did, using ClusterControl or some other automation tool. And the error transactions that I mentioned, they definitely can ruin your day. So the error transactions are the transactions executed on slave, but not on a master. And this is a problem because with GTID, because the error transactions are related to GTID, with GTID enabled, if MySQL host becomes a master, or maybe if a slave is connecting to a MySQL host, to a master, it asks for every transaction that master executed and slave did not. And this causes a problem. So let's imagine, for example, you have master and slave, and for some reason, some transaction has been executed on a slave. And then 6 months later, the slave becomes a master. So every slave which will connect to this new master will ask for this transaction, which happened 6 months earlier. And obviously, most likely, this transaction couldn't be found in the binary logs, and in this case, replication will fail. So again, read-only and super read-only can help you to avoid these problems by preventing anything from writing to a slave. GTID subset, GTID subtract are functions which can help you to identify that there is error transaction and check which exact event, which exact transaction has been executed on the slave. And in general, we covered this topic in one of our blog posts. So if you're running MySQL replication using GTID and you are not familiar with the concept of error transactions, we strongly encourage you to read this blog post and familiarize yourself with potential problems that you may be facing, and how to actually handle this, how to check if you're seeing if you're experiencing problems with error transactions, and how to fix this kind of issue. So it's definitely worth checking, because that's just a time bomb which is waiting to explode at some point when you fail over to one of your slaves. And of course, we have other resources on MySQL replication. Some of them related strictly to MySQL replication. Some of those blog posts just mentioned they are covering partially MySQL replication. So we really encourage you to take a look at them. Maybe, hopefully, you'll find them useful. And I think it's a time for another poll. So it's back to you, JJ.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Krzysztof. And just before we wrap up for today, we wanted to ask all of you a last question, which is just to get an idea of what database versions you're currently using yourselves in your organization, whether it's MySQL 5.5, 5.6, 5.7, or maybe you're on MariaDB as well, on 10 or 10.1, or maybe some other version of those. It'd be great to get your feedback here. And in the meantime, Krzysztof, we had one question here from Julian, who's asking whether starting a slave requires the master to be taken offline.
I mean, it depends what you mean by starting a slave. So just running a start slave, it does not require anything on the master. If we're talking about provisioning a slave, like you have empty MySQL instance and you want to provision it, then basically it depends on how you want to provision it. With extra backup, it is not needed, and mostly that's why we are using extra backup for the ClusterControl.
Okay, great. Thanks, Krzysztof. So hopefully that answered Julian's questions, and otherwise, please ask us more, some more. But here's the poll result as well. So it's split between 5.5 and 5.6. So maybe there is some, some of you might be thinking of upgrading maybe from 5.5 to a newer version. And then it's nice to see a good share of MariaDB as well. So that's those are some interesting results. Any reactions to that, Krzysztof?
I mean, as you said, yeah, those who are using 5.5 probably are thinking about upgrade, because 5.7 is already it's available for some time. So in next couple of months, I think it's a nice time to think about upgrading from the earlier MySQL versions. And yeah, and what's also interesting is a lot of people are using GTID capable MySQL versions. We are talking about 5.6, 5.7, and both MariaDBs. So it's also pretty interesting. It will be interesting to see how many of you are using GTID. If you do, be aware of error transactions and keep your eye on this kind of problem.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for this last poll, and thanks, Krzysztof, for comments. I'm just going to hide this now, and let me see. There's another question here. Maybe we can take that just before we finished for today. It's a question from Robert, and he's asking whether when setting up a Galera cluster, he noticed that you disabled APAR-more. Were there any security concerns caused by this?
Yeah, I mean, it was not Galera, it was MySQL Replication cluster. But yeah, indeed, we disabled APAR-more. Frankly, it is not required. It is more. It can cause more problems with Galera. With MySQL Replication, it's not required. I just didn't untick this option because, well, this is just a demo. But in general, of course, you have to make sure that you either satisfy your safety security requirements, and in the same time that you are able to operate your databases, because APAR-more or SA Linux both can kind of impact the way how your MySQL operates. So if you want to stick with them, you definitely want to test everything that works correctly. But for MySQL Replication, I think it should work just fine from scratch.
Great. Thanks a million, Krzysztof, and thanks, Robert, for the question. We're just over the hour by a couple of minutes, so I think we can wrap up for today. Thanks very much, Krzysztof, for the presentation and for the demo, and thank you everyone for your participation today. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, the session is recorded, so we will make the slides and the replay available to you in the next couple of days, and this will be done via a blog post. So do follow our blog for that information. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact us directly, of course. We will have another webinar in about 3 to 4 weeks. And until then, we wish you a good rest of the week and a good rest of the day as well. And talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.